under the fading orange glow of the desert sun. A wagon creaked its way along a narrow trail that twisted through the canyon like a wounded snake. The horses were tired, their hides glistening with sweat, and the woman sitting on the wagon bench held her shawl close to her shoulders, even though the heat was still rising off the sand. Her hair was unpinned from the long journey, and her eyes carried both fear and defiance. Behind her, in the silence of the rocks, the wind whispered stories of men who never returned from these lands. Men who thought they could cross Apache territory unharmed. She had been told that this route was safer now, that the tribes had moved farther south, but deep down, she knew it was a lie. The air carried a kind of stillness that was not natural, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Every shadow looked alive. Every sound made her hand grip the small knife hidden beneath her skirts. Her heart raced as she looked around, feeling watched as if someone unseen rode beside her, keeping pace with her every mile. Then, without warning, the right wheel hit a sharp rock, and the wagon jolted violently. She cried out as the reins slipped from her hands. One of the horses reared, snapping the harness. In a storm of dust and hooves, the wagon tilted through her to the ground, and the world went dark. When she woke, it was night. The stars burned bright above her, and the air was cold. The horses were gone. The wagon was broken. Her ankle ached from the fall, and a faint trail of smoke rose in the distance. Panic tightened in her chest. She wasn't alone. She crawled to the edge of a rock, peering through the darkness. A small fire flickered in the canyon below. Someone was there. Someone watching. She tried to decide whether to run or hide, but before she could move, a shadow stepped into the firelight. He was tall, bare-chested, his skin bronze under the flames, his hair long and dark like the night sky. He wore a necklace of bone and turquoise, and though his stance was calm, there was a power in his silence that made her tremble. An Apache, her breath caught. Every story she'd ever heard about them rushed through her mind, stories told by frightened travelers and soldiers who saw them as ghosts of the wilderness. Yet as she watched him, she saw no monster, no wild fury. His face carried something else, something unreadable. He turned his head slightly, as if he knew she was there, even before she made a sound. When their eyes met, she froze. He didn't speak. He didn't move closer, but the quiet between them felt louder than thunder. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she tried to stand, but the pain in her ankle forced her down again. That was when he walked toward her, slow and steady, the firelight behind him outlining his figure in a golden glow. "Stay away," she warned, though her voice shook. He stopped a few feet away, his dark eyes studying her face, her torn dress, her trembling hands. Then he crouched down, reached into a pouch tied to his belt, and offered her a strip of cloth. "For the wound," he said in a low, deep voice that carried an accent heavy with the rhythm of another world. She hesitated. The stories had said Apaches didn't show mercy, but his voice wasn't cruel. It was quiet, almost careful. Still, she refused to take it. He set the cloth beside her and stood up. "You should not be here," he said, glancing toward the broken wagon in the distance. "This land is not safe for you." Her throat felt dry. "I didn't come here by choice. I was headed west. The wagon broke." He nodded slowly. "Then you were lucky you lived." His gaze lingered on her ankle, then on her face again. "Follow the river when the sun rises. It will take you to the fort." Before she could reply, he turned away and walked toward the fire, as if the conversation had ended. But something inside her refused to stay silent. "Wait," she said, her voice echoing against the canyon walls. "You're not going to leave me here, are you?" He stopped, his back still to her. "You will live if you listen." "Please," she said, her voice softer now. "I can't walk far." "Not alone." He didn't answer at first. The wind moved through the canyon, carrying the scent of mesquite and ash. Finally, he looked over his shoulder. "If I stay," he said slowly, "it will not be easy for you." She didn't understand what he meant until he came closer again. The firelight caught the scars across his shoulder, the strength in his hands, the calm in his eyes. He was unlike any man she had ever seen. There was no fear in him, no rush. Only something steady, ancient. She felt her heartbeat quicken as he reached for her arm. His touch was firm, but not rough. He helped her stand, his hands supporting her weight. "You can rest near the fire," he said, "but keep your knife close. Trust no one." She wanted to ask why he was helping her, but the question caught in her throat. As they walked toward the fire, the silence between them grew heavier. Every sound of the desert seemed to fade, replaced by the beating of her heart. When she finally sat by the flames, she looked at him again. He was sharpening a knife, the blade catching the light in flashes. "You hate us," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. She hesitated. "I don't even know you. You were taught to fear us. I was taught to survive." He nodded, as if that answer satisfied him. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled. The night stretched on. Then, as the flames burned lower, she whispered the question that had been circling in her mind since he touched her hand. "Will it hurt?" His head turned slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "What?" "This. Whatever happens now," she said quietly, unable to hold his gaze. "Will it hurt?" He didn't answer right away. He placed the knife down beside him and leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. "Pain is not always the enemy," he said. "Sometimes it's what keeps you alive." Her lips parted, but no words came. The firelight flickered across his face, carving shadows that made him look both dangerous and human. Something shifted in the air, something she couldn't name. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and for a heartbeat she thought he might draw back, but he didn't. His fingers lingered near her cheek, rough from years under the sun. She felt the warmth of his skin, the pulse beneath his wrist. The world seemed to grow smaller, quieter, as if everything beyond the fire had ceased to exist. Then a distant howl shattered the silence. The Apache rose instantly, grabbing his knife. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice sharp now. She watched him move into the shadows, his body blending into the dark like he was born from it. Her breath trembled in her chest as the night swallowed him whole. Somewhere out there, the howl came again, closer this time. She didn't know whether to run or stay, whether he was her protector or her captor. The firelight flickered, and the desert seemed to close in around her. All she knew was that whatever waited in those shadows, it had already changed everything, and from that night on, nothing would ever be the same again. The wind howled through the canyon like a restless spirit, sweeping sand and smoke around the small campfire. She sat near it, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the shadows dance across the rocks. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the darkness where the Apache warrior had disappeared, half expecting him to reappear and half fearing what else might come instead. The fire cracked softly, but it did little to comfort her. The night felt alive, listening. In the distance, another sound, rose a sharp cry followed by a thud. Her body stiffened. Then came silence. She reached for her small knife, though she knew it would do little against whatever prowled in these lands. Moments later, the warrior emerged from the dark, his steps soundless, his face unreadable. A streak of dust crossed his chest. His knife carried a trace of something dark along its edge. "You're safe," he said simply, cleaning the blade on a strip of cloth. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Coyotes," he answered, though his tone suggested it was something more. He crouched beside the fire, adding another piece of wood, his movements slow and controlled. She wanted to ask if he had killed someone, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said quietly, "You move like the night itself." He didn't smile, but there was a faint glimmer in his eyes. "The night is my friend. It tells me what others cannot see." She studied him carefully. The way he sat, the way his gaze never lingered too long on her, yet never fully left her either. His silence was heavier than most men's words. He looked like someone who had spent years alone, someone shaped by the land itself. After a while, she spoke again. "You said this land isn't safe for me? Why?" He looked up, his expression darkening. "Because no one owns it anymore. Not the settlers, not my people. Only hunger and vengeance live here now. She frowned. Vengeance? He stared into the flames. Once these canyons were full of life. The rivers ran strong, the villages stood proud. Then the soldiers came. They burned, they took, and they called it peace. My father died fighting them. My mother died running from them. Now the land remembers. His voice was calm, but she could feel the pain beneath it. And you? She asked softly. What do you remember? He looked at her, his eyes deep and tired. Too much. The fire popped between them, sending sparks into the air. She lowered her gaze, feeling a strange ache in her chest. She had heard stories of raids, of attacks on settlers, of lives lost on both sides. But sitting here beside him, she realized those stories were only half the truth. There was another side one, written in ashes and silence. She tried to shift her ankle, wincing from the pain. He noticed immediately. Without a word, he took a small pouch from his belt and poured some crushed herbs into his hand. He mixed them with water and pressed the paste gently over her swollen skin. It will take the pain away, he said. She flinched slightly at his touch. Why are you helping me? He paused. Because once someone helped me when I should have been left to die? She watched his hands work, steady and patient. His fingers were rough, but there was care in the way he bound the cloth around her ankle. The smell of the herbs filled the air sharp and earthy. Was it a woman? She asked quietly. He nodded once. A settler's wife. She hid me after a raid. She risked her life for mine. What happened to her? His jaw tightened. Her husband found out. They said the Apache cursed her. They burned her home to cleanse the shame. She felt her stomach twist. And you? I left, he said. But not before I made a promise. I would never harm someone who meant no harm to me. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The firelight flickered against the walls of the canyon, throwing their shadows together on the stone. She thought of the man she had left behind in the town east of Hera, man who had promised her safety, but whose hands had turned cruel. She had run to escape him, believing the wilderness would be her freedom. Instead, it had led her here, to a stranger whose silence spoke louder than any vow. Do you live here? She asked finally. He looked around at the canyon. No one truly lives here. The land keeps us alive, but it does not belong to us anymore. I move when the wind changes. Sometimes I help the tribes nearby. Sometimes I help those who are lost, like you. She hesitated. And what happens after you help them? He met her eyes. They forget me. Something in his tone made her chest tighten again. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she stopped herself. Instead, she stared into the flames, lost in the rhythm of the fire. The stars stretched endlessly above them. Clear and cold, he rose quietly and walked to where his horse stood tethered among the rocks. The animal nickered softly as he brushed its mane. You should sleep, he said, without turning. We move at dawn. She wanted to argue, to ask where they were going, but exhaustion weighed her down. Her eyelids grew heavy. She lay back against a folded blanket he had placed beside the fire. The warmth and the faint hum of crickets blurred her thoughts. Before sleep took her, she saw him still standing there, looking toward the horizon as if he were guarding the world itself. When morning came, the sun rose pale and quiet. She woke to the sound of boots on gravel. He had already packed what little they had. Can you stand? He asked. She tried and managed to balance with his help. The pain was still there, but duller now. Where are we going? To the river. It will lead you to the fort. And you. He looked toward the distant hills. My path is not yours. They walked together in silence for a long time. The land stretched endlessly, fields of golden grass, distant mesas, and the occasional cry of an eagle circling overhead. He moved like he knew every inch of the terrain, every rock and shadow. She followed behind, feeling small in a world so vast and unforgiving. As they reached a dry riverbed, she noticed marks in the dirt boot prints, fresh and deep. Her heart skipped. Someone's been here. He crouched down, touching the tracks with his fingers. Soldiers, he said. 2 days old? Are they looking for me? Maybe, he said. Or maybe for me. She stared at him, realization dawning. You're being hunted. He stood up slowly, his face hardening. Everyone who remembers what was taken is being hunted. She wanted to believe he was wrong, that the world was not as cruel as his words made it sound. But the fear in her stomach told her otherwise. They moved along the riverbed, keeping low between the rocks. The air grew hotter as the day went on, and the horizon shimmered with heat. By midday, they stopped under the shade of a cliff. He handed her a canteen. The water tasted like metal, but it cooled her throat. You should rest, he said. She sat down, her legs trembling. Why don't you ever smile? She asked, half teasing, half curious. He looked at her with a calm that was almost distant. Because smiles belong to those who have something left to lose. His words struck her harder than she expected. She wanted to say that everyone had something to lose, but when she saw the emptiness in his eyes, she stayed quiet. He turned away, scanning the canyon like a wolf scenting danger. Later, when the sun began to sink again, they saw smoke rising in the distance. She felt her breath catch. The fort. He shook his head. No, that is not the fort. What is it then? Trouble, he said grimly. They moved closer, staying low among the rocks. From a ridge she saw a tan overturned wagon, horses scattered, and 3 figures moving among the wreckage. They were not soldiers. The men wore ragged coats, bandanas over their faces. Looters, she whispered. We should help them. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Help who? The dead. Her eyes widened. You don't know that? He didn't argue, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Then one of the men below shouted, holding something up a piece of fabric, pale and torn. Her stomach twisted. It was part of a woman's dress. Without thinking, she started forward, but his hand caught her arm. Stay, he ordered quietly. Let me go, she whispered fiercely. Someone might still be alive. He held her gaze for a long moment, then released her arm. If you go down there, you do not go alone. They moved silently down the slope, the air thick with the scent of smoke and gunpowder. Each step felt heavier than the last. She didn't know what waited belowly that she couldn't turn away now. As they reached the bottom of the ridge, a crow cried overhead, circling the wreck. The Apache warrior stopped suddenly, his body tense. He raised his hand for her to stay still. What is it? She whispered. He didn't answer. He stepped forward slowly, his knife drawn. Eyes sharp as the wind stirred the dust around them, and in that moment, she realized something: the danger she had feared all along might not be behind them anymore. It was waiting ahead, watching, breathing the same air. The world around her seemed to hold its breath again, just as it had the night they met. Only this time she knew that whatever came next would test both their courage and their hearts in ways neither could have imagined. The wreckage lay silent under the burning afternoon sun. The smell of smoke and blood hung heavy in the air. She covered her mouth with her hand, her heart pounding as her eyes moved across the ground-splintered wood. Broken wheels and shattered crates spilling out cornmeal and cloth. Then she saw a hand, pale and still, half buried under the wagon. Her stomach turned. She wanted to look away, but her eyes refused to obey. The Apache warrior moved ahead of her, his steps careful and quiet. He knelt by the body, brushing away the dust. 2 men, he murmured, both shot. His voice was low, steady, but his expression had darkened. Not soldiers, traitors. She swallowed hard. Then who did this? He pointed toward the sand, where deep footprints led away into the canyon. 3 men. Maybe more? They took what they could carry and left. Can we follow them? She asked, her voice trembling. He looked at her, his eyes sharp. We could, but once we do, there is no turning back. She hesitated. Something inside her wanted to run far from this place, to find safety, to pretend none of this was real. But another part of her, the part that had survived cruelty and lies, refused to turn away again. Then we follow, she said quietly. He gave a slow nod, then gathered the dead traitor's rifle. The barrel was dented, but it would fire once or twice if needed. Stay close, he said. They moved through the canyon, following the faint trail of footprints that led deeper between the rocks. The heat was punishing. the air thick with dust, and every echo seemed to hide a threat. She could feel the unease in him, though he said nothing. His senses were sharper than hers. He seemed to hear things she could not. At times he would stop suddenly, tilt his head, then change direction without a word as they walked. Her mind kept drifting back to the wreck, to the lifeless faces and the quiet horror left behind. "Have you seen things like that before?" she asked. "Too many times," he replied without looking back. "The war between men doesn't end with battles. It follows the survivors." "Then you've been fighting a long time." "I was born into it," he said. "My father fought for our people's land. I fight to keep the memory of it alive." His words settled heavily between them. She wanted to ask him what he would do if he ever stopped fighting, but something in his tone warned her not to. He was a man built out of loss, and some wounds, she sensed, were never meant to heal. By late afternoon, the tracks split in two directions. He crouched beside them, studying the sand. "Two went north," he said. "One turned east." "Which one do we follow?" "The one alone," he said. "The others will find him again later. If he has food or water, he will lead us to them." They followed the eastern path until the ground sloped into a dry ravine. The air cooled slightly, and the sound of running water echoed faintly ahead. A small stream wound between the stones. He raised his hand for silence. Down below, near the water, a man knelt, filling a canteen. His rifle leaned against a rock beside him. His hat was torn, his face half-burned by the sun. The warrior's eyes narrowed. "He was at the wagon," he whispered. "What will you do?" she asked, her pulse quickening. "Ask questions," he said. Before she could stop him, he was already moving, silent as a shadow. He approached from behind, stepping lightly until he was only a few feet away. Then, with one swift motion, he pressed the knife to the man's throat. The outlaw froze. "Don't move," the warrior said. "Where are the others?" The man trembled. We went separate ways." "I swear I don't know where they are now." The warrior's eyes were cold. "You lie." "No, please," the man stammered. "They took the woman, not me. I wanted no part of it." The woman above felt her heart sink. "They took someone?" she called out. The outlaw turned his head slightly, seeing her for the first time. "A young one," he gasped. "She was still alive when they left." Her hand flew to her mouth. "Dear God." The Apache's grip tightened. "Where?" "Up north, near the caves. They said they'd trade her for horses." The warrior's eyes hardened. "You'll show us." "I can't," the man began, but he didn't finish. The warrior struck him with the butt of the knife, knocking him to the ground. When the man came to, his hands were tied, and he was forced to walk ahead of them as they moved toward the northern ridge. The sun sank low, turning the sky blood-red. Shadows stretched long over the desert. As they walked, she felt a growing dread in her chest. The silence between them grew heavier, broken only by the sound of boots on stone and the outlaw's labored breathing. "Why would they take her?" she asked quietly. "Because there is no law here," the warrior said. "Only power." She looked at him, seeing the anger simmering just beneath his calm surface. "You've seen men like them before." "Too many times," he said. "And every time the innocent pay." When they finally reached the caves, the sky had gone dark. The outlaw pointed toward a cluster of rocks where faint light flickered inside. "There," he whispered. "They're inside." The Apache warrior tied the man's hands tighter, then pushed him to the ground. "If you lied," he said quietly, "you'll never speak again." The man nodded, his face pale. The warrior turned to her. "Stay here." "No," she said firmly. "I'm not staying behind." He looked at her for a long moment. "If they see you, they won't. I'll keep back." "But I'm coming." He didn't argue again. Together, they moved closer, keeping low among the stones. The voices inside the cave grew clearer, to men arguing, a third laughing. Then came a muffled cry, a woman's voice, pleading. Her stomach twisted, the Apache's jaw clenched. He motioned for her to stay, then slipped silently around the side of the cave. She waited, every muscle in her body tense, the night pressing in around her. Then came a sharp sound, a struggle, A shout, a crash of metal. Gunfire split the silence. She ducked behind a boulder, her ears ringing. More shouting, then footsteps heavy, frantic. A man stumbled out of the cave, clutching his side. He saw her and froze, his eyes wild. She backed away. But before he could lift his gun, the Apache appeared behind him, knife flashing in the moonlight. The man fell without a sound. The warrior's chest rose and fell heavily as he wiped the blade clean. "Stay down," he said. "What about the woman?" She whispered. He disappeared into the cave again. She waited, her heart racing, until finally he re-emerged, carrying a young girl wrapped in a torn blanket. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, but she was breathing. "She's alive," he said, "but weak." They carried her out to the stream and gave her water. The girl clung to the woman's arm, shaking uncontrollably. "They said they'd sell me," she whispered. "Said no one would come for me." The woman brushed her hair gently. "You're safe now." The Apache stood nearby, watching the canyon. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." She looked up at him. "You think more are coming?" "They will," he said. "Men like that don't forgive being hunted." The girl's eyes widened with fear. They said someone was waiting for them by the river. A man with soldiers. The warrior's expression changed. "Soldiers?" "Yes," the girl said. "They were supposed to bring me there." He looked toward the dark horizon. "Then this isn't just outlaws. Someone gave them orders." The woman stared at him, realization dawning. "You mean from the fort?" "Maybe," he said grimly. "There are those who trade lives for gold, even in uniform." The fire in his eyes frightened. "What will you do?" "Find out who," he said, "and end it." The wind began to rise again, carrying the distant sound of hooves. He turned sharply, scanning the shadows. "They're close," he said. "We move now." She helped the girl to her feet, her body trembling. The Apache took the lead, guiding them along the rocks. Behind them, the faint glow of torches appeared against the dark canyon walls. Voices shouted, "Go!" He ordered. They ran through the night, the echoes of pursuit growing louder. Her lungs burned, her ankle throbbed, but she kept running. The warrior moved ahead, a silent force in the darkness, leading them toward the unknown, and as the first shot cracked through the air, she realized that whatever bond had begun between them was now bound by danger, and there would be no turning back. The shots echoed across the canyon, sharp and hollow like cracks of thunder. Dust rose around them as the woman stumbled after the Apache, clutching the frightened girl's hand. The air smelled of gunpowder and sweat, and each heartbeat felt like a countdown to something terrible. Behind them, the riders shouted orders in English and Spanish, their torches flickering like restless spirits against the rock walls. "Keep moving," the Apache said, his voice low but firm. "They're tracking by the firelight." Her lungs burned, her ankle throbbed, but she didn't slow down. The girl tripped once, and the warrior scooped her up without breaking stride. His movements were quick, silent, almost inhuman. The canyon curved sharply, and he led them into a narrow passage between two towering cliffs. They stopped just long enough for him to listen. The shouts grew fainter. Only the wind answered now. He turned to her, eyes glinting under the pale moonlight. "We'll rest here," he whispered. Only for a moment. She leaned against the cold rock, trying to steady her breath. "Who are they?" she asked. "Men who trade in lives," he replied. "Some wear uniforms, some don't, but they serve the same greed." Her voice shook. "You think they're the same soldiers you spoke of before?" He nodded slowly. "There's a captain near the fort who pays for captives. He calls it justice, but it's just gold changing hands." The girl whimpered softly, burying her face against the woman's shoulder. "They said the captain wanted me," she whispered. "They said he'd pay more for me than the others." The Apache's expression hardened. "Then we cannot go to the fort," he said. "That place is not safety. It's a trap." The woman stared at him. "Then where?" He looked toward the north, where the canyon opened into the wild hills. "There's a place where the soldiers won't follow. My people once lived there. We'll go at dawn. Will we make it?" She asked. He didn't answer. He only looked at her for a long moment, and the silence between them said more than words could. The night stretched on. The girl slept wrapped in a blanket. The fireless cold pressed against them, and the woman shivered. The Apache sat a few feet away, sharpening his knife, his eyes scanning the darkness. She studied him quietly, the strength in his shoulders, the scars on his arms, the way he seemed both part of this land and apart from it. "Why do you help me?" she asked softly. "You could have left me at the river." He looked up. "Because I see what others choose not to see." "And what do you see?" He paused, his voice quiet. "A woman running from pain, carrying more courage than she knows." She didn't know how to answer that. Her throat tightened. He went back to his knife, and she turned her gaze to the sky. The stars were cold and endless. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, long and low like a warning. When dawn broke, the sky turned pale gold. The Apache woke them with a whisper. "They'll move with the sunrise. We must go now." They followed a hidden trail up the ridge, the rocks cutting into their hands as they climbed. The path grew steeper and the air thinner. The woman's legs trembled, but she pushed forward. Every sound of loose gravel made her flinch, afraid of being discovered. At the top of the ridge they paused. From there the land stretched wide, a desert of red stone, scattered scrub, and winding shadows. Below, faint trails of riders moved in formation. She saw the glint of rifles. "They're circling," the Apache said. "They know we're near. Can we outrun them?" She asked, "Not on foot." He looked toward the far horizon. "There's an old camp in the hills. If we reach it, we can defend from there." The descent was rough and quiet. Every few minutes he stopped to check the tracks behind them. Once they heard a distant gunshot, then silence again. The girl clung to the woman's hand. Dust clung to their clothes and hair, and their water was nearly gone. As the sun climbed high, they finally reached the edge of a dried-out valley. At its center stood the remains of old dwellings, circle-shaped shelters made from sticks and hides, long abandoned. The Apache slowed his steps, his expression unreadable. "This was my home," he said, "before the soldiers burned it." She looked around at the charred ground, the broken stones, the quiet ghosts of what once had been. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He walked to the center of the camp, his hand brushing against an old spear half buried in the dust. "This place remembers," he said. "The earth never forgets what blood has touched it." They made shelter in one of the half-standing huts. The Apache set traps near the entrance and scouted the ridge. The woman helped the girl drink the last of their water. The air was still, almost too quiet. As the hours passed, a strange unease filled the space. The woman found herself staring at the Apache as he returned, his face darkened with thought. "They're close," he said. "Before sundown, they'll find us. What will you do?" "What I must," he replied. She stepped toward him. "You can't fight all of them." He looked at her calmly. "Then I'll make them remember what it costs to hunt the wrong soul." She reached out, gripping his arm. "If you die, what happens to us?" He turned his gaze to her hand. "On his skin, you'll live. That's enough." The moment lingered. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her fingers. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." Before he could speak, a gunshot tore through the air. The bullet struck the edge of the shelter, splintering the wood. The girl screamed. The Apache pulled them both down. "They found us." He crawled to the opening, peering through the cracks. Riders were approaching fast 5, maybe 6, torches raised. The heat of the day shimmered around them. He grabbed his rifle, loaded the last round, and handed her the trader's old gun. "If they reach the camp, aim for the horses. Don't miss." Her hands trembled as she took it. "I've never shot anyone." "Then shoot to live," he said. The first wave came quickly. Bullets whistled past, tearing through the dry hides. The Apache fired once, and one rider fell. The others scattered, shouting in anger. The woman clutched the girl close, her heart pounding in her ears. When the smoke cleared for a moment, she saw movement on the ridge flag, a gleam of brass buttons. Soldiers, the captain's men. Her breath caught. "They brought soldiers," she whispered. The Apache cursed under his breath. Then the outlaws weren't lying. Captain's voice rang out from the ridge. You're surrounded. Surrender, and the woman and child will be spared. The woman looked at the Apache, fear in her eyes. He knows about us. He knew before we left the canyon, the warrior said. He was waiting for someone to lead him here. Her mind reeled. The man we tied, he must have escaped. His expression turned grim. He told them where we'd go. The captain shouted again. You have until sundown. The Apache stared toward the ridge, his jaw tightening. He's lying. He'll kill us either way. The woman's throat felt dry. Then what choice do we have? He looked at her, his eyes fierce but calm. To fight until the sun sets or to vanish before it rises? She didn't understand at first. Vanish? There are tunnels under this place, he said. Paths my people built long ago. They lead to the cliffs beyond the valley. But what about the soldiers? She asked. They'll burn the camp, he said. They'll think we're ashes by dawn. The girl tugged her sleeve. Will we really make it? The Apache knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. If you listen to me, yes, but you must be brave. The wind began to rise again, carrying the faint sound of hooves circling. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold. The Apache gathered what little they had, a few bullets, a knife, a pouch of herbs. Then he turned to the woman. When I tell you, follow me into the earth, don't stop for anything. Her heart pounded. What if you're wrong? He gave her a look she'd never forget. Then none of us will live long enough to know. Outside, the soldiers prepared their torches. The smell of burning pitch drifted toward them. The camp, once a memory of his people, was about to become a battlefield. The woman tightened her grip on the gun, her palms slick with sweat. The Apache stood by the entrance, his body tense. Eyes fixed on the horizon, as the last sliver of sun vanished, he whispered, now. And in that moment, fire rained down upon the valley. Everything they thought they knew was consumed in smoke and fury. The firestorm tore through the valley, devouring everything the wind could reach. The Apache grabbed the woman and the girl, pushing them toward the hollow beneath the collapsed hut. The entrance was small, hidden under a mound of ash and rock. Smoke choked the air, and the earth shook, as if the land itself was crying out in pain. He motioned for them to crawl inside first, his voice rough but steady. Go now. The woman pulled the girl through the narrow passage, coughing as the smoke filled her lungs. The Apache followed last, dragging a heavy stone across the opening to seal it. Darkness swallowed them. The roar of fire above sounded like the world ending. They could feel the heat through the ground, the faint trembling of horses and shouting men outside. The air inside the tunnel was damp and cold, smelling of earth and age. For a moment, none of them spoke. The girl clung to the woman's arm, trembling. The Apache's breathing was calm, controlled. He lit a small piece of dried moss with flint, enough to cast a faint orange glow. The walls were narrow, carved long ago. My people built these when they hid from soldiers, he said quietly. They lead to the cliffs, but they twist. Stay close. The woman nodded. Her throat was raw, but she found her voice. Will they burn the whole valley? Yes, he said. And when they find no bodies, they'll think the fire did their work. They crawled deeper through the tunnel, the air growing colder. Every sound echoed, the scrape of boots, the crackle of distant fire, the distant thunder of rocks falling. After what felt like hours, the tunnel widened into a chamber. The Apache stopped and held up his hand. Listen. Faint voices drifted through the cracks above. The soldiers were still nearby, searching the ruins. The woman could hear their laughter, harsh and cruel. Her stomach twisted when she heard the captain's voice, smooth and certain, like a man used to commanding fear. No sign of them, he said. But they won't have gone far. Double the patrol at dawn. The Apache's eyes darkened. He won't stop until he's sure. What will you do? She asked. He looked at her. Finish what began years ago. Before she could speak, he motioned for silence again. The voices above faded as the soldiers moved away. The Apache waited a long time before speaking. We move now. They'll return with dogs when the smoke clears. They crawled on, and soon A faint light appeared, ahead a slit in the rock where daylight broke through. When they emerged, the fire was far behind, only a red glow on the horizon. The girl wept softly with relief, clutching the woman's hand. The Apache scanned the ridges, his eyes sharp. "They'll follow the river," he said. "We take the high ground." The climb was steep, the rocks cutting into their palms, but the air was clean again. When they reached the top, they stopped to rest. Below, the burned valley looked small, swallowed by smoke. The woman sat beside him, her body trembling from exhaustion. "Do you think they'll stop?" she asked. He shook his head. "Men like him never stop until someone makes them." She turned to look at him. "Then what will you do?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the horizon where the fort lay, faint and distant. "He took my brother," he said finally. "Years ago. The captain's name is Latham. He used to offer peace to my people, then sent soldiers to kill them. I was a boy when I saw him last." She watched the fire in his eyes. "Then this isn't just about survival for you." "No," he said. "It's about remembering." They made camp beneath a rocky overhang, sheltered from the wind. The girl fell asleep quickly, worn from fear and hunger. The woman sat by the small fire the Apache built, her thoughts tangled between fear and admiration. She looked at him, his face lit by the flickering flame, the quiet strength in his silence. "When I met you," she said softly, "I thought you'd be the danger." He glanced at her. "And now? Now I think you're the only reason I'm alive." For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly he said, "You asked me once if it would hurt. It always does. But pain can lead you somewhere if you don't let it own you." She didn't respond. She simply watched him, realizing how much had changed since the night her wagon broke. She had come into this land frightened and lost. Now she was part of something larger, something older than fear. The next morning, the Apache left before sunrise. He told her to stay hidden with the girl. "If I'm not back by nightfall," he said, "follow the ridge north until you find the river again." She caught his arm before he could go. "You're going after him, aren't you?" He nodded once. "This ends today, then let me come." He shook his head. "No, you've seen enough of blood." Her eyes filled with tears. "And if you don't return?" He looked at her with something close to tenderness. "Then remember me kindly." He disappeared into the haze, his figure fading against the rising sun. She waited through the long day, her heart heavy with worry. The wind carried faint echoes from the distant gunfire, shouts, silence. Hours passed. The girl dozed in her arms, unaware of the storm beyond the ridge. When the sun dipped low, a lone figure appeared on the trail. For a moment she thought it was a dream. But then she saw the familiar walk, the slow, steady stride. The Apache's shoulder was bleeding, but he was alive. She ran to him, her voice breaking. "You came back?" He nodded, lowering himself to the ground. "It's done," he said. Her breath caught. "The captain, gone," he said simply. "He'll hunt no more." She sat beside him, binding his wound with the last of the cloth. He didn't resist. His eyes were distant, heavy with the weight of all he had done. "It's strange," he said quietly. "I thought it would bring peace, but all I feel is tired." She pressed his hand. "Maybe peace doesn't come from what we take back. Maybe it comes from what we let go." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something gentle in his eyes, something almost like hope. They left the mountains at dawn, following the river until the land softened into green fields again. By the time they reached the small settlement beyond the ridge, the girl was smiling again, her fear replaced by the innocence of safety. The townsfolk offered them food and water, and for the first time in many days, they slept without the sound of guns or fire. When morning came, the Apache stood at the edge of the camp staring at the road ahead. The woman joined him, her heart heavy. "You're leaving," she said. He nodded. "My place is not among towns. There are others still lost out there. I can help them find the way." She swallowed the ache in her chest. "Will I ever see you again?" He looked at her for a long time. "You'll see me in the wind, in the land that heals." Then he placed a small turquoise stone in her hand. "For remembrance," he said. She wanted to speak, to ask him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. He turned and walked into the morning light, his figure growing smaller with every step until the desert took him back. The woman stood there for a long time, the stone warm in her palm, the sound of the river flowing beside her. She thought of everything that had been lost and everything that had been found. The pain, the courage, the bond between them, it all felt like part of something greater, something eternal. When the girl woke and came running to her, she smiled, the first true smile in a long time. She looked toward the horizon, where the sun rose over the endless wild land, and whispered softly, "It didn't hurt. It only changed everything." And somewhere far away, in the whispering wind over the red hills, she thought she heard his voice again, steady, quiet, alive in the land that never forgets.